Someone in the comments asked me how to draw multiple cubes. So in this video I'm going to show you how to draw multiple cubes with different textures. So for now we have just a simple scene with only one cube, and this cube is textured with this create.jpg file or JPEG image. And it is also translated to on the x-axis to right. Here, as you can see. And the first thing I changed, also, I just created this texture loader.py file, which will generate the textures. So actually I'm just simplified the main code. So now I can just generate a texture, so like this. So texture equals GLGen textures with one slot, and then create the texture like this. So cube texture equals load texture and path to the file, which is the create.jpg, and the texture. And this load texture comes from the texture loader file. So from texture loader import load texture. And in the texture loader I just imported the necessary functions and also the constant like the GL unsigned bind or the constant from the OpenGL library. So instead of importing like here, importing everything, I'm just here in this file, I'm just importing just those functions and constant which are needed for these function load texture. And the load texture just binds the texture 2D, says the wrapping parameters, also the filtering parameters. Using pill, it loads the image, it transposes it, so it flips top button, it gets the raw image data, and it uploads the using the GL text image 2D, and it also returns the generated texture. So here I can save it to this cube texture. So okay, now I can create much easily textures. So I'm just going to duplicate 2 times this line, and now instead of generating only one texture or only one texture slot, so if you give to GLGen textures 1, it will generate only one ID. If you give it free, it will generate an array of free values or slot. So to the first slot, I'm going to rename it to cube1 texture and index it. So to the first slot, which is at index 0, I'm going to store this create.jpg. The cube texture 2 will be, let's say, the cat.png, and it will be at the texture slot at index 1. And this will be the cube3 texture, and I'm going to use the smiley.png file, png, and it will be stored in the texture slot at index 3. So, and the same applies to when you are creating buffers. You can create a buffer with 2 or 3 slots, but I'm going back to this at a later in another video. So now we have 3 textures, and to actually now let's create 3 translations for the or 3 model matrices for the 3 cubes. So I'm going to just rename this to cube1, and I'm going to duplicate this line. This will be the cube2, and this will be the cube3. The cube1 will be positioned at x1, the cube2 will be positioned at x-1, and the cube3 will be positioned at x0, y1, and a little bit back, so -3. And now I'm going to remove, of course, this line, or just cut it out, because now we are going to move it inside the application loop. And the first uniform matrix will be the cube1 matrix. So cube1. And in order to see it, I'm just going to copy these 2 lines and paste it 2 times. So the second uniform matrix will be set to cube2, and the third uniform matrix will be set to cube3. And if I run now, it will draw the, I'm just going to show you, index is out of bounds for x is 0 with size 3. Okay. Okay, here it should be 2, not texture at index 2. So now it draws the 3 cubes, and for each cube is applied the lastly bound texture, which is smile.png. So if you want to have different textures, you should also just bind those textures. So here, before I draw the first cube, I'm just going to copy these lines, so gr bind texture, and here, let's say, before the uniform matrix settings, I'm going to bind texture at slot 0, and here I'm going to bind the texture at slot 1, and here I'm going to bind the texture at slot 2, index 2. And now if I run it, as you can see now, this has the create texture, this has the cat texture, and the third cube has this smiley texture. Of course, you don't have to, I mean, if you just want to draw cubes, you can reuse this same buffer over and over again. You don't have to create a separate buffer for each cube because it is not needed. But if you want to draw different types of geometry, let's say a triangle or quad or anything else, you have to create a separate buffer for those 3D meshes as well. But because these are all just cubes, I can just reuse the same buffer for drawing them. I'm just creating a different model here, model matrix for each cube. And of course you can also just make some different translations. I'm going to just quickly do this offline. So off screen I created this simple scene. So now we have 3 cubes. This right cube rotates around the x-axis and also around the y-axis, and it also gets translated to right. The second cube with this cat PNG is only rotating on the x-axis, and it's also translated to the left. The third cube with this smiley image rotates around the y-axis, and it's translated on the y-axis 1 unit and on the z-axis 3 units. So it appears to be smaller than these two because these are closer to the view or the camera. So let me show you how I created this. So here I'm just created as usual 2 rotation matrices, a rotation X and a rotation Y, using the from X rotation and the from Y rotation. Here I combined the 2 rotations using the matrix 44 that multiplied rotation X and rotation Y. And I created a model matrix. And the model matrix is a combined matrix of the rotation and the cube's translation. Cube 1's translation. And then of course I bind texture for at texture index 1 or 0. I'm uploading this model matrix to the model uniform, and I'm drawing the cube. Then I'm just setting a new value to the model matrix. This time it is the rotation on X and the cube 2 translation, which is this one. So this combines the rotation with the translation. I bind here the texture at slot 1, uploading this model matrix to the uniform location and also drawing the cube. And the third cube's model matrix is also its combined matrix of the rotation Y and the cube 3 translation. So this one, which translates it on the y-axis 1 and negative 3 units on the z-axis. So it puts in the back. So this is a combined model for the third cube. I'm also binding its texture, which is in the texture slot or index 2, and also uploading the uniform matrix to the uniform location, or the model matrix to the uniform location, and I'm drawing this third cube. So technically, if you just want to draw cubes, you can draw as many cubes as you want. You just have to add different positions or translations for each cube, so that without the translation matrix, everything will be drawn in the same place. So that's why we need for each cube a different translation matrix.